Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. Plagues, written by Objective Campaign 82. Minister Ulik stood by the hardened glass that divided her bunker from the hellfire outside. She stood and watched as great human warplanes flew low arcs over what was once the thriving metropolitan heart of Ixi. Now it and all the world was little more than ash. The Umbi and their Veccan allies had laughed when they heard that humans had rules of war. A lesser race, barely clinging to existence on their pathetic world, trying to dictate what was and wasn't allowed in war to races who'd been expanding across the galaxy long before their ancestors had even discovered fire. It had seemed comical. They began the war as a means of teaching the humans a lesson, and they had delighted in ticking off some of the so-called war crimes one by one. The Queen Matriarch had considered making the humans into a client race once they had won, after the humans had learned who was really in charge. Not anymore. It had seemed like the humans were cowering before the combined might of the Umbi and Veccan, losing battle after battle. But now they knew that they were only biding their time, stoking the hot coals of rage and their counterattack. Without warning or preamble, 3 Umbi worlds and 4 Veccan worlds came under attack from humanity. They claimed orbital control with a disdainful ease, pushing back their defense fleets within only minutes. The planetary defense forces readied and prepared themselves for an invasion, but none came. Instead, the humans launched pod after pod into the oceans, maybe 10,000 in total, and then they just disappeared after leaving one last message. "Thus said the Lord." They were confused and tried to investigate the pods, but whatever they had held had been released into the oceans without trace. For 6 days, no one knew what the humans had done until the 7th day came. On the 7th day, all the world's oceans began to turn to blood. Thick, red, gooey blood, ripe with hemoglobin. People panicked, and the scientists tried to figure out how the oceans had turned red overnight. They found a new microorganism in the water with obvious signs of genetic modification that was consuming all native plankton within the water, and released the blood as a byproduct. Planetary governments raced to discover a solution to the bloody water attack the humans created, and were unprepared for when the organisms mutated again. The microorganisms clumped up and transformed into little mites that rushed to the land and infested people's bodies, biting, clawing, and infesting in their fur. The mites jumped from one person to another with ease, crawled under their sealed doors and up drain pipes. People went mad with scratching and rashes, and no amount of soap and water could wash them off. 7 days later, every non-sapient animal on the planet became diseased and quickly died in thousands. There were so many corpses flooding the land that it was impossible to remove all the bodies. They tried constructing massive pyres for burning the corpses, but the noxious smoke they released was fatally poisonous, so the beasts had to be left to rot on the streets. 7 days after that, people began to break out in boils and legions, a blood-borne illness brought on by the bugs. People tried scratching and clawing at their skin until they bled. It was at this point in the outbreak that a full evacuation of the planet was declared. Government officials, leaders of industry, military personnel, men and children, anyone who was still healthy tried to flee en masse. That was when the human fleets returned. They fired upon any ship that left atmosphere, and forced their escape ships to land for safety's sake. They had sent plea after plea for the humans to let them leave. They begged and prostrated themselves before the lesser race, but the humans never responded. There was no Umbi counterattack. The High Matriarch had written the worlds off as a complete and utter loss. 7 days after people had broken out in boils and lesions, human planes descended into the atmosphere and began to spread the white sticky substance across the world. At the same time, their ships lobbed planetary bombs at the helpless worlds. The white sticky substance ignited and burned with an acrid scent that soon filled the world. It would stick to the buildings, trees, water, and skin, burning everything it touched. People tried to flee, but nowhere was safe. They tried to hunker underground, only to spread the sickness faster between themselves. The worst part was that after society had collapsed on these worlds, the humans took over the broadcasts and began to show the galaxy what had become of these worlds. The Queen Matriarch openly declared these worlds lost and began preparing deeper defenses on all the remaining planets. Outpost worlds where undefendable stations were abandoned, leaving the citizens to fend for themselves if the humans came. Somehow, over the fall of Ixie and other worlds like it, the public changed the way it thought of humans. Before the attack, galactic news broadcasts would note war with boredom and contempt, and the data nets made jokes about how badly the humans were outmatched. But now, there was fear and confusion in the minds of the people as they tried to comprehend what kind of deranged species would create such suffering. 7 days after the burning of these worlds began, the humans offered a conference to negotiate peace. Their only condition is that the conference would take place on Ixie. So Ulik had been sent from the homeworld and now stood next to the human ambassador and watched as the world continued to burn around them. There weren't any people left in the broken metropolis of Ixie, and yet they still spread their fire. Ulik glanced at her human counterpart and saw an unmistakable glee in the human's eyes. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the red-haired woman said, the first word she had spoken since Ulik had joined by the window. "The admirals only wanted to orbitally bombard the world, but I made a bid for using napalm. I said, imagine how beautiful the flames will be. It'll be a spectacle greater than Hiroshima or Nagasaki." Ulik stared at the woman, no, the psychopath, in horror. One of her own aides turned to vomit. "It is a shame," she continued, unperturbed by the reactions. "All of the other plagues worked just as we expected, except the frogs. Something about this world prevented the tadpoles from infesting every freshwater lake, river, and stream. And of course, we couldn't figure out how to blacken the sun for 3 days either." She sighed before turning to Ulik, fire drenched within her deep green eyes, and Ulik felt her whole body grow cold. "Well, shall we discuss negotiations then?" the human said pleasantly, with a wave over to the table. Ulik swallowed down her revulsion at the lesser woman. No, this lesser monster ordering her around, not caring for all the suffering just outside the window. "Yes, let's," she grunted out stiffly. The human woman and her aides sat at one end of the table, while her own group sat at the other end. "Refreshments?" the monster offered. "We had unbloodied water from the ship, or coffee, if you prefer." Ulik's own mouth was dry. "Water," she croaked. The monster smiled and waved towards an attendant. A male rose and walked around to the table, placing cups in front of everyone before pouring out crystal-clear water, something that was now a luxury on Ixie. Ulik stared at the strange, malformed white cups until something clicked in her mind as she realized that the cups were all Umbi skulls. The skulls of people collected and polished by these murderers to be used as tableware. "Something wrong?" the ambassador asked, taking a sip out of her own skull cup, releasing a satisfied "ah." "Something about watching flames really makes a girl thirsty. Now, on to business. The unified nations of Earth would like to end this silly little war. As pretty as the flames are, the cost of napalm is starting to become a little too high for our liking. Our terms are as follows. The Umbi League will claim full responsibility for the war and will repay the UNE an amount equal to 10 times what we spent on this little spat over the course of the 50 Terran years. The planets of Ixie, Kalti, and Orcs are to be ceded to the UNE, along with any star, planetoid, and comet within 10 light-year radius around each world's parent state. The Ambi will be required to pull out of their alliance with the Viking, and must also openly denounce the Viking Empire. Is there anything else you would like to add? Any extra tribute you people offer humanity will be greatly appreciated." Rage, black, toxic rage poured through Ulik. "You lesser end, you dare dictate terms to us. We could have bombed the entirety of your homeworld from the start of the war. We only held back because we did not wish to ruin the future dominion of our queen. And yet you have the nerve to demand such outrageous terms for peace," she roared, losing her famously cool and patient demeanor. The red-haired creature laughed. "It's a good thing you didn't try to take Earth. We would have had to initiate Scorched Earth Protocol and ignite all the fusion bombs we stuck in our mantle. I have a lovely cabin on Earth, and it would have been a shame to lose my summer home." Ulik sneered at the creature's bluff. "You wouldn't dare destroy your home world." The creature's gaze turned frosty. Try us, it challenged. Ulik's blood ran cold as she saw the small glimmer of sanity in the human's eyes, the first sign of sanity, and it was claiming that the humans would ruin their own world to keep it out of Umbi hands. Ulik would have thought it to be a bluff, but the stone-cold look in the human's eyes told her that she was being dead serious. You've already seen what other lengths we are willing to traverse in war. Why challenge our conviction now? It shook its head and sighed. You're still not getting it, are you? Fine. Dmitri, my briefcase, please. She commanded one of the male aides, her jovial mirth returning as quickly as it had left. The aide brought out a leather briefcase and placed it on the table. After seeing the human choice of tableware, she didn't want to guess at the creature the leather had once belonged to. The human opened the case and displayed its contents to Ulik. Inside were 10 glass vials, all filled with different colored liquids. The final plague on the list is the plague of the firstborn children. But we figured that since we went this far, we might as well go above and beyond. In here, we have the best human bioengineering has to offer, each specifically tailored to one particular kind of agony. Her hand reached over to the red one. This one is the very same skin disease that we used here. Her hand moved over to the purple one. And this will make every nerve ending in your body feel like they're on fire. She grinned now. Her hand moved to the transparent one. And this one in particular is my favorite. This one is a swarm of nanites that will transfer the new host via fluid, air, contact, and proximity. They infect the host's brain and drive the victim into a mad cannibalistic rage, tearing into their friends and family with abandon. It doesn't kill the host either. It just turns the world around it into an orgy of blood and gore. A transmutable purge syndrome, she laughed. Or rather cackled in glee. Me personally, I would like to see this one in action. So I'm not really too concerned about whether you accept our generous peace offer or not. Just know that if you turn down our generous offer today, then tomorrow these plagues will find their way to your homeworlds. Ulik stared at the briefcase in horror and realized something that should have been apparent before the war. These humans were a psychopathic and deranged species. This was why they had rules for war, because without them they would be little to hold themselves back. Those rules were to prevent themselves from letting women like this blood-haired woman from indulging in the primal, violent urges. Ulik had spoken with human POWs before she came here, and there was definitely something off about them. But this demon before her was on a different level, and they had invited creatures like her into the most depraved acts by actively trying to commit war crimes. They had brought this on themselves. Ulik needed to end this war before the humans had any more time to invent new tragedies. And, more than that, she needed to put forward a new initiative in the Galaxy Forum on what was and wasn't allowed in wartime. Ambassador Aoife Douglas leaned back into her chair. The negotiations had gone perfectly to plan. The bear-like Umbi ambassador had believed her feigned act of madness, and a good thing too. Aoife had to reach deep within herself to touch something dark and rotten to pull that off, and it scared her to know that something as foul as that was inside of her. Maybe it wasn't much of an act, she thought, as she looked to the bunker window and the world she had burned. This whole plan of barbaric shock and awe had been hers, after all. After the bomb hit Geneva, she was all that was left to lead the UNE, and she had come up with this unconventional plan to end the war. She diverted every asset they had into this plan. $44 trillion worth of effort went into the bioweapons and the fleet perfectly crafted to bring it down on those poor worlds. But it worked. All of that cheap cost of a measly money and her own immortal soul. Everything went to plan, Kaito, her vice-chancellor, said blandly. Yes, better than we hoped. I need a drink. She sighed in defeat. Kaito nodded grimly and reached into the briefcase in the bioweapon she had shown Ulik. Grape or cherry? He asked as he held up the 2 vials of Kool-Aid. Cherry, she said. Red for all the blood on her hands. Kaito nodded and added a shot of vodka from the nanobot vial. She drank it all in one gulp and shuddered as the bitter taste ran down her throat. All right, now to repeat the act with the Viking. She got up from the table and Kaito followed her out. She idly wondered as she walked out, when I meet God, will he damn me for my crimes or congratulate me for following his example? She shuddered and blocked out the thought. She still had one more job to do before she went off to meet God. No point in worrying about it now. End of story. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Lord Azrakal, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.